When you don't take time to look at it through other people's eyes. Take some time and reflect on what you believe in your soul. Cause that is the key to life. You gotta let the negativity go.
Hello and welcome to What the Fox podcast with your two hosts, Lindsey Fox and Amber Ross. Welcome, you guys. Happy summer. We hope that you've been really enjoying as much of this heat wave as you possibly can handle.
Yeah.
It's been brutal, y'all. Brutal. But without further ado, we do want to talk about some passive-aggressive communication today.
Super pumped.
That is the topic of the day, and there's definitely a reason as to why this came up into our bubble to discuss. But before we get started, just a reminder that we are sponsored by therapyappointment.com. If you are a therapist looking to start a practice, use therapyappointment.com to create and build your practice. Or if you need a therapist, go there to find one.
Whoop, whoop.
All right. So passive aggressive.
Lindsey Fox.
Yeah.
Lindsey Fox.
Yeah. We're both Southern. We're both from the South. So let's talk about passive aggressive communication. Do y'all know where I'm coming from?
Also known as the bless your heart of the South. It's interesting to me quite often. You will throw a topic idea at me and immediately I'm like, yeah, okay, that's easy enough to talk about. And then I start looking into it a little bit further and I start peeling back the layers of the onion and I find a new piece of information that I previously did not have available to me.
Yep.
In this instance, I've never drawn the connection between sarcasm and passive aggressive behavior or passive aggressive communication.
I mean, it's definitely, it can be. So I don't think we should make an all or nothing statement in saying that it can always that it's always a passive aggressive communication. But
Right.
Yeah, sarcasm can definitely be a bit of passive aggression. But can we just talk about what it is first? I mean, I want to jump there before
I'm excited to talk. Of course, we can define it.
I know. You guys, if y'all have been listening to us for a while, y'all already know how we operate. Amber tends to jump like 10 steps forward because we've already kind of like discussed a few things beforehand. And then I'm like, wait, we got to bring you guys.
I get so excited.
I know. We're not ready to talk about sarcasm yet.
Listen, I've got that golden retriever energy I think they talk about.
Girl,
so I just get real excited.
Tail wagging, so excited. It's really quite true. That is the best way to describe it. Yeah, so passive aggressive communication. You can tell, by the way, between Amber and I, we are so direct with each other. Like, I feel like we actually, like, to be passive aggressive would be a form of joking with each other, because in terms of sarcasm, if you want to talk about sarcasm in that sense, because we are so direct and straightforward about things. We're very crystal clear.
Yeah, I was thinking in my head, it would almost be a form of punishment if we tried to be passive aggressive with one another, because neither of us would I don't think we'd know what to do. We'd be like, wait, what's happening right now? I'm sorry.
Right. So I'm just going to pull straight from the Mayo Clinic. I thought it was pretty cool that the Mayo Clinic specifically had a thing about passive aggressive behavior. Yeah, no kidding. Because some people actually think that it is a mental health condition. And I'm laughing because you know what? I could totally see where one might think it is a mental health condition, because particularly whenever it's like how a person's entire identity is made up culturally with passive aggressive communication and behaviors.
Yeah, I could see that. Okay.
Yep. So passive aggressive behavior is a pattern of indirectly expressing negative feelings instead of openly addressing them. There's a disconnect between what a person who exhibits passive aggressive behavior says and what he or she does. For example, someone who engages in passive aggressive behavior might appear to agree, perhaps even enthusiastically, with another person's request. Rather than complying with the request, however, he or she might express anger or resentment by failing to follow through or missing deadlines.
Yep.
Yeah. And we've
Yep.
all been there. We've all been there. We've all been that person. We've all experienced this to some degree. Um, but culturally is where I kind of wanted to dive into some of this because being that we are both from the South, this was probably the most rude awakening whenever I returned to the South after being gone for more than a decade.
That's fair because I do feel like here in the South, we seem more polite and we seem more kind sometimes. I'm overgeneralizing. Not everybody in the South is like this,
Yeah.
insert whatever caveats you need. But as a general rule, it's that sweet Southern charm, like Southern belle, whatever persona, when in reality, like these can be some of the most vicious people on the planet as far as like
Yes.
wielding their words in a way that's super painful.
Ooh, yes. Like a dagger to the heart, too,
Right?
but with a smile on your
But with
face.
a smile the whole dang time. Yeah.
Yes. So, specific signs of passive aggressive behavior include resentment and opposition to the demands of others, especially the demands of people in positions of authority,
Hmm.
resistance to cooperation, procrastination, and intentional mistakes in response to others' demands,
Mm-hmm.
cynical, sullen, or hostile attitude, or frequent complaints about feeling underappreciated or cheated.
Yeah.
Hmm. So while it can be those like examples or specific behaviors might show up with different mental health conditions, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a mental health condition. And
Yeah.
so I think that's just like something I wanted to highlight there because I was thinking, man, why did the Mayo Clinic feel the need to actually write about this? But whenever you look
Right.
at these specific behaviors, you can see where, one might look at that and be like, is this a personality disorder? Is it,
Yeah.
for a child, is it oppositional defiance disorder? Is it ADHD? Um, and the truth of the matter is, maybe someone is passive aggressive or presenting with those behaviors because they really just don't know how to speak up for themselves or state their needs or know how to feel seen or heard around a person.
Yeah. Or, in some cases, I can think of one very recently that happened to me where I was being passive aggressive without even like having the realization that it was happening. I was not self aware to know what I was doing or what I was saying, or really to notice that, hey, this is not the way to handle the situation. Like, Eric and he had made some plans and I didn't feel included in the plan making. And there was a little communication challenge between the two of us about what was happening, when it was happening, all the, me, I like the logistics, I like getting into the details.
You
And
are a
as a
project
res
manager.
I am. And he was trying to do something nice and plan something. And I twirled it all out of control.
You know how many times Erica said that? Like how much he would love to surprise you, but he understands like the way things work. No, no, that's
It
not
just
an option.
doesn't work. No, it genuinely does not work. And this wasn't necessarily a case where he was trying to surprise me, but he was trying to take a burden of planning off of me,
Sure.
which I am grateful for. And I married a wonderful man. And like, we can all recognize that I am completely imperfect and completely like, I got my own issues. But it was so eye opening to walk through this situation because he looked at me one day and he was like, hey, is this something that you don't want to do? He said, I'm
Hmm.
getting the feeling from you that you're not interested in this thing which I have planned. If that is the case, let's pivot. Let's talk through it. And he was so kind and
Yeah.
so clear and so calm in the way that he brought it to me. I was like, well, shit, I'm being an asshole. Like, and it was that moment I was like, I am so sorry. No, like this is all me. I completely took a left turn into La La Land. So let's back the train up, right?
Yep. Yep.
But I share that to say like we all have moments where we slide into unhealthy behaviors, where we slide into like old patterns,
Yeah.
but being able to call attention to that in a way that wasn't
Yeah.
rude or mean or hateful. Like he had every right to say, hey, stop being
Yeah.
but he didn't. Right. And he never would because it's not his DNA. But it just, when you brought this topic up to me, I was like, oh crap, I just went through that. This is going to be like, this is going to be one of
Wow.
the conversations where I'm a little uncomfortable.
That's so, I mean, that is, our conversations are so timely with, Amber and I don't talk every day. And sometimes we don't even
Mm-mm.
talk during the week because like life is life. So we're busy. But it is funny how these conversations come up because then when we reconnect in the recording, we both will have something to share on it. And for me, this topic came up because I was just recently at the beach and, um, I was staying with some family friends, and there's a number of situations here that I can pull from, but the whole thing initially began because I had taken my dog out to go swimming, and
Mm.
this family lives like right on the waterway, and my dog needed to obviously get rinsed off. She was like covered in ocean water and sand
Oh
and all
gosh,
this
and
stuff.
sand and all the
Of
things.
course. And so the homeowner said, you know, no sandy wet dogs in the house. And I was like, okay, don't worry, I'm gonna go rinse her off. And then they repeated, no sandy wet dogs in the house. I said, yeah, I'm gonna go rinse her off. And then they repeated it a third
Oh my
time. And I was
goodness.
like, okay, there's something happening here. I had to put on that part of my brain where I'm like, there's something happening in the communication here, and I need to pause for a moment and sort through it real fast to figure out
Yeah.
what are we not aligned on. And then after the third time she said it, I said, yeah, I'm going to go rinse her off right now outside. Oh no, only clean dogs are allowed in the house. I said, oh, okay. Are you saying I should go give my dog a bath? Yes, go wash your dog with shampoo, please. I said, oh, okay.
Oh,
Like I would
okay.
have, yeah, that, so in my head, I'm like, okay, if you had led with that, we would have been on the same page like 4 times ago. And in my head, it felt so like, like my brain was instantly like, wait, so why not just say that in the first place? But what I was taking notice of in that moment is that this is definitely something since returning to the South, and this is not exclusive to this individual by any means. Like
Mm-mm.
I love this person, that they are like a family member to me. Um, but what it was bringing to my awareness was more so a combination of a generational gap and across
Mm.
like women and how we show up in the world. And it was also showing me the cultural components at play whenever you're, born and raised in the South and expected to, participate in your cotillion school and smile and say yes when you really mean no and never really talk about what you want or need. But you just, and then kind of are really passive with stating things that you do need or have requests about, um, where we try to make ourselves or our requests seem as small as possible. So, since I know this family so well, I felt comfortable kind of bringing up this topic of like where I was like noticing this communication
Yeah.
difference because I've known them my entire life, but I also have been told by everyone down south, like, oh, you changed so much once you moved up north. You're just not the same. I'm like,
And you said
oh,
thank
because
you.
yeah, I'm really glad I'm not the same actually, but really I just kind of found my people up north where I'm like, wow, you
Yeah.
never really question where you stand with people. They're so
Mm.
direct. There is no sarcasm, right? In the sense of like a gray area where you're not sure like
Right.
where you stand with a person. They're pretty straightforward. Um, so anyway, while we were talking about this, um, this person's husband brought up an excellent point to highlight just how ingrained this passive aggressive communication is as a part of our worldview and our and how we function. He said, "Do you remember the Duke's mayonnaise commercial?" And when Duke's mayonnaise first came out, and when he said this, I was like, "Oh my gosh, Duke's mayonnaise! That is such a Southern thing. Like I haven't thought about Duke mayonnaise in forever." But you better believe I was raised on like some tomato sandwiches with some Duke's
Mater
mayonnaise on white.
sandwiches. Mater
Yeah,
sandwiches.
on white bread with
Yeah.
some like salt
With
and
salt and
pepper.
pepper.
Yes, like this is so Southern. And so her husband like has some background in like advertising and marketing stuff like that. I was like, well, no, actually, I don't remember the Duke mayonnaise commercial. He was like, it was so simple. And to me, it was the best ad ever. They held up the Duke's mayonnaise thing and all they said was, Duke's mayonnaise. If you're not using it, bless your heart.
Oh my gosh, no, they didn't.
And I was like, that's it.
That
is
is
the
it.
South in a nutshell.
That is Southern passive communication in a nutshell. You are correct.
Yeah. And yet we love Duke's mayonnaise. And if you're not using it, bless your heart.
Yeah, that is okay. That's hilarious. And what I'm really intrigued by, first of all, great example. I love that he pulled that out of his head. When you brought this up to the family, obviously you are very close to them. They're people that you are comfortable with. Obviously very comfortable in that you could say, hey, we had this miscommunication and I want to talk about it versus just, letting it slide or forgetting about it. How did that conversation go when you brought it up, aside from talking about Duke's mayonnaise? Oh, it didn't go anywhere. Oh, no, it was pivoted to the Dukes.
It didn't go anywhere in that moment. In that moment, I realized, okay, I think there's some space needed, right? So just because you're aware that there's a friction or a point here where there's some misunderstanding, it doesn't mean you have to jump right into the fire and it has to be addressed right on the spot. No, I think in this moment, for me, I just needed to sit with it for a little bit and take notice, like, hey, what am I noticing here that's feeling off and uncomfortable, but I'm not sure why. Yeah. And I'm not, like, it took me a moment because, another piece of this, right, is that we go towards what is familiar, and what is familiar we automatically equate to being safe, right? So nothing a part of this dialogue felt abnormal for my upbringing, but what I did notice is, like, it wasn't sitting right with me and I couldn't pinpoint that in the moment. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm just thinking, it shows growth and understanding that you were able to walk away from that and sit with it rather than trying to solve it right that minute. Because I know like you and I are very much fixers or recovering fixers or like work in progress fixers, as far as like we see something that's off and we're like, oh, we should talk through this. Like we should workshop it. We should do the thing. And I think it's nice to take a beat and say, wait, let's analyze and let's understand before we try to dive in.
Yeah, I think for me, it was just like I needed to take a pause and sit with it for a little bit. And then once I was able to identify and understand what the thing was, then over the time of my visit, it was able to become like a loose conversation that was brought up in a, not specifically linked to that situation, but more so as a broader conversation of differences that I was becoming aware of. And it is interesting because when this moment happened, I actually had lost sight of how much this bothered me whenever I first returned to North Carolina during the pandemic. And I was like really trying to adjust to an array of things. I had just left my husband and just moving to a new state, and pandemic, Black Lives Matters revolution and craziness going on all over the place. Like,
a lot of unrest, a lot of big emotions, a lot of big shifts, and, everybody just trying to find their place.
Survive. Right. And so there was, it just brought back some of those feelings. And that's why I was like, why are these feelings from then popping up for me right now in this moment? Yeah. And I couldn't make sense of it. And I was like, yes, this is reminding me of like whenever I first came back to North Carolina and how unsettling that was.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. Obviously, I've never lived anywhere else, so I live vicariously through you and all of your adventures, of all of the places you've visited. I know, bless my heart. I am like the typical, I was born here and I'll stay here. I haven't experienced that, right? So I don't notice it as often, and I don't pick up on the behavior patterns that are specific to the South, or the ones that are specific to the East or the West, or, whatever the case may be. Right. So I love that you were able to walk through that on that trip, because I know that trip was meaningful in a lot of ways, because water and sand and air and just Getting away,
elements,
unplugging, all of
elements
the
of the earth.
elements. Yes.
Yeah, I do. I am someone who loves the water, so it was good for
Mm,
my soul. I always say
good.
the mountains and the beach are good for the soul. So, yeah, it was definitely a good thing. But it just made me really sit with that topic a little bit longer than I had anticipated.
Yeah.
Um, and so I know that you had pulled up your own little list there about passive aggressive communication. What is it that you were looking up over there, Amber?
So, as often happens when you bring a topic to me or when we talk about a topic, I like to go to my friend Google and just see the most common things that get Googled, or the most common, the ones that pop up first if you put in keywords.
Yeah.
And one that was a common theme was people seeking out how to deal with passive aggressive behavior, how
Mm,
to react, or how to not necessarily how to avoid, but honestly, how to work through it.
yeah.
Um, and one of the funniest things that came up on each of the list was the idea of using humor to diffuse the situations. And it cracked me up because in my mind, all I could think of were sarcastic ways of using humor, and then sarcasm being passive aggressive. And I got into this loop in my head and I was like, oh my God.
That's me.
I was like, help, help, help. I gotta get out. Um, but it's something that I wanted to talk through on here because we've both recently had situations happen where we were faced by or actively being passive aggressive, and how you work through that as someone who is seeing it or having it done to them, and things you can do as someone who maybe fell into an old pattern or who reacted poorly in a situation. So I think you talked about part of that before, as far as you can bring up a general conversation, or you can ask for clarification. You can
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say, sorry to interrupt, but I was going to say, and also I think sometimes, especially, and this is the piece I was really trying to sit with, is sometimes people have absolutely no awareness that they're even being passive aggressive.
Yep.
And so to your right, that's what you're saying, like realizing about yourself, but just us, if you're on the receiving end, it's important to keep in mind that oftentimes the person who is being passive aggressive, they might not even have the awareness that they
Not
are
a dang
behaving
clue.
in that way.
No, and
Like
it's go ahead.
I was just going to comment on like mindfulness around the mood shift. So if you are the
Mm,
person being the one that is passive aggressive, my like the telltale sign I would say to lean in on is like when you notice that abrupt mood shift of,
mm,
um, if you go from like a really calm, steady state and all of a sudden you're feeling really defensive, or you're feeling like hostile, or like
yeah.
they just said I need to do this, I'm going to do the complete opposite. um, and this happened to me recently where I was the one being passive aggressive and I did not realize it. This happened maybe like a month ago, maybe. And without getting into the specific situation, because it is personal in nature, it was something that the person, fortunately, is a really clear and kind communicator.
Mm.
And they were like, "Hey, I just noticed that you responded this way." And I was like, "Ooh,
Oh,
thank you for saying that out loud.
yeah.
Like, thank you for labeling what you just observed, because it made me more aware of what I must have come off like in that moment and
Right.
how I was presenting." Um, Obviously, that person wasn't aware of how they kind of like stirred something up, like a negative emotion inside of me. But like they weren't aware of my story and my
Right, right.
experience and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. So all they saw was the behavior on the outside. And I was like, wow, thank you. That was a good call out, because I wasn't really thinking of that piece. And so, I'm subjected to human fallacy just like the next
Oh
person.
my
And this is
gosh.
something like,
Yes. Yes.
well, I say this because, like, while we're talking about ways to overcome it, I want to make it really clear in saying I'm no expert in saying that I'm completely null and void of being a
Of
passive
human
aggressive communicator.
emotions.
Well, the
Like,
passive aggressive communication thing is still something like I have really tried to be mindful of,
mm,
just because there has been so much of that ingrained cultural upbringing, and my entire family is like that as communicators. So trying to kind of break that pattern, break that generational cycle, it's pretty challenging.
Well, and I also want to draw the parallel, like, we're not supposed to be aggressive, and then sometimes we overcorrect to passive aggressive, and it's not the right correction. Okay. And that, I think, is my case, where I used to be I'm really blunt, I just say it how it is, this is just me, not sugarcoating things and whatever. And for those who can't see us on YouTube, I'm using air quotations. And I overcorrected to passive aggressive because that's what I saw everybody else doing. And I'm like, oh, well, this must be the way we're supposed to communicate. This is the way it's preferred. Not true, right?
No.
Passive aggressive, while it does happen, and obviously scenarios happen, nobody's going to be perfect. Nobody's trying to be perfect, but it is something we should be aware of, and how we're impacting other people. Because obviously in my situation, like, I hurt Eric's feelings, and I never want to do that, because that's not my goal, and it's not cool. So I do think that we all play a role in, one, calling out the behavior when we see it, and calling it out in kindness, calling it out in a way that's clear, and not necessarily like coddling the person, because that's not necessary, but just being mindful of your approach and saying, hey, I saw this thing. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. And I also think, on that note, there's a huge correlation there between having porous boundaries that are like a sponge, where they kind of stick and they kind of don't. There's definitely a correlation there between having porous boundaries and being passive aggressive.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another interesting piece, because we've talked about in other episodes around boundary setting, how there are porous boundaries that are really rigid and fixed boundaries. So that would kind of coincide with what you're talking about with, like, well, I just say it how it is and whatever. But there is that happy medium sweet spot of just being clear, kind, direct, straightforward. You can state a boundary, but also make a request. You can take notice of when someone's setting a boundary or making a request, without personalizing it.
Yeah.
And so, it's a delicate dance, and it's sort of like when people talk about that pathway to enlightenment. It's not a one size fits all approach, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're ever going to get there. I mean, it's like we waffle in these like on the spectrum of doing well one day, and maybe we
just having a rough day.
Yeah.
Like, yep. I usually tell people I'm nothing more than an overcomplicated houseplant, right? So, like, if I'm not getting the right water, if I don't have the right sunshine, if I didn't, whatever the case may be, sometimes I struggle emotionally, and it's something
the stuff you come up with is a riot.
And I have had to become more self-aware over the years to manage that for myself, and not rely on other people to point it out in me, and not rely on other people to be my temperature gauge, and have that mindfulness and that self-awareness to say, oof, I need to take a beat. I'm dealing with some stuff. I'm going to separate myself for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to revisit this, whatever the situation may be, because you can't expect yourself to never have an emotion that's not good or not like pleasant, right? Sometimes we're going to have outbursts. Sometimes we're going to be passive aggressive. Sometimes we're going to say things that aren't very nice. And the goal is to do it less and less over time, not to get to a point where you never do it, because then you're a robot.
Yeah. Thank you, AI.
Yeah. Terrifying.
All set with that.
All set. But I did, going back to my list, there was only one other one that I actually wanted to call out, because we touched on it here. And I think it's something that is valuable information for anybody navigating the human experience. And that's, you mentioned not addressing it in the moment, right? Not calling the behavior out or identifying the behavior in that instance, and taking a minute to sit with it to really understand, right? And I think
Context matters. I'm not saying that's a one size fits all approach. I think sometimes addressing it right on the spot is absolutely essential for certain people, places, things, situations, whatever. But I'm saying in that situation with where I was in that moment, yes, taking a pause was needed.
Yes,
So I
and
could,
it's exactly where I'm going, because the one commonality between all of the many lists I reviewed was addressing it and being very firm in that moment and not letting time pass and not, saying, well, 4 weeks ago, you did this
yeah.
thing and it upset me.
Well,
Friend,
then
4 weeks ago, what are we
yeah,
even talking about?
now we're talking
Like,
about having your little box of grudges and shoving them all
oh,
back there so you can pull them
yes.
out in convenient times and be an asshole. We're not talking
Yes.
about that.
No, but I did want to call that out because
Thank you.
the idea of passive aggressive behavior is avoiding conflict. So it can be
Yes.
really, really attractive to continue the conflict avoidance by not addressing the issue. And we don't want to do that because it's going to come up at some point and it's just going to get more and more ugly as time goes on.
Yep, it's true. And also, I want to circle back, and I'm glad that you highlighted that stuff because it is important. And
Yeah.
just before I was going to hop around to something else as well. But another piece of this is that you see this a lot with dialectical behavioral therapy or REBT or just different types of therapy modalities as a whole, is having a really direct approach with your client. And so some people, they're not a fan of it. And
Yeah.
those people are probably seeing therapists that practice something else, a different treatment modality. I know for me personally, the way that I practice as a coach and a therapist, I'm really direct, and that's just how I operate.
What? No way. You can't imagine.
And, a part of that too is especially with the work that I do around trauma and me having my own trauma history. Something I want to comment about with regard to sarcasm that you mentioned is that sarcasm is one of the most challenging things for a person with PTSD to understand and to read and to be able to assess, because psychologically they're trying to assess, am I safe or am I not safe? What is this gray area of communication that I can't figure out? You're saying this with a straight face, but you're being funny. I don't think this is funny because I don't know if you're a threat right now or not.
Yeah, that's such
And
a good call out.
so that's why I'm saying, like, in terms of passive aggressive communication, yeah, sarcasm can be a thing, but also keep in mind, when if you're someone who has a known trauma history at play, um, that that sarcasm can feel really jarring or cause you to become defensive for other reasons that you might not have the cognitive awareness of.
Yeah, that's a
you
good
know
call out. And it all comes down to understanding your physiology, understanding your experience, doing the work, finding a therapist, a coach, somebody to help you through all of that, because we can't do the work in a vacuum. I mean, specifically with someone who's dealing with PTSD, like you need to enlist resources, ones that are
yeah,
reputable and ones that actually care.
yeah, absolutely. Yep, that's all, folks.
That's it. That's it. Happy summer. Happy day. I hope that this conversation maybe sparked a few thought bubbles for you. And if it did, we would love to hear your comments in the DMs. We'd love to get your feedback in our inbox and just, what did this spark for you? What new information did you pick up, or how does this change your perspective?
It's true. And Amber, you know what I was just thinking about?
Oh gosh, what?
I just had a fleeting thought. So for our listeners who have maybe just been like trickling in here and there, um, this summer Amber and I agreed to do new content like every other week through the summer before season 2 ends, which will be ending next month. But it just occurred to me, if you guys missed out on Amber's huge announcement, she is taking some serious time off and she will not be with us during season 3.
True, true.
So, with that being said, it just clicked. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is like one of our last one-on-ones
Womp womp.
within this season, but I'm still going to recruit you to hang out with me from time to time in season 3."
Why are you trying to make me cry? I already cried in the last episode. I'm not doing it again. I refuse. No, I love it. And it's true. I won't be back for season
Because I love
3. I
you.
don't know what the future holds beyond that, but just enjoying it. And yes, this is one of our last episodes for this season as far as one-on-ones, and it's a little bit bittersweet. So
it is.
Until next time.
All right. Well, while Amber grabs her tissues, thank you guys for tuning in. It's always a pleasure to connect. And hey, if there's any topic recommendations or things that pop up in your life where you're like, I'd love to hear these girls, or in this case, girl, because my partner in crime is leaving.
I love you.
That's passive aggressive. That was passive aggressive. Hey, P.S. That was a highlight of passive aggressive communication.
Highlight. Oh my gosh.
But if you have a topic, please feel free to send us a DM, whatever your social media platform is, or send us an email at whatthefoxtails@gmail.com. And that's TALES tales. And we would love to hear from you. So until next Tuesday, y'all, we hope you have an awesome week ahead. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
And we all sing, everything is gonna be just fine. It's gonna fall into place. The sun is gonna set on your terrible day.